I'm Leo Panitch with Greg Albo. We're editors of the Socialist Register, and I want to welcome you to the launch of the 2018 volume entitled Rethinking Democracy. This volume of the Register, the 54th volume, the Register was founded in 1964, so the first one came out, was conceived as a companion volume to last year's, which was Rethinking Revolution. And in the opening paragraph of the preface, we note that and say that in the preface to the volume in 2017, we wrote, "The political event of gaining state power, whether by taking parliament or in a collapse of the existing political regime, has proven time and again to be less crucial than the social revolution of building capacities for self-government and the democratization and socialization of institutional resources. The revolutionary event in itself will never be a sufficient condition for the exploited and oppressed to build their own capacities for establishing collective rather than competitive ways of living through developing socialist democracy." The volume we have here on the panel, therefore, three of the contributors to these last two volumes. Two of them in the current volume, Dennis Peelin and Ian Mackay, and one of them a contributor to the Rethinking Revolution volume last year, Jody Dean, who wasn't able to join us last year, so we guilted her to joining us this year. Her essay on the actuality of revolution, which involved looking back at Lukács and Lenin to see their relevance to the question of party building today, she'll be addressing, but she'll be addressing it in the context of the two essays that she's read by Dennis and by Ian. Let me say, first of all, before introducing Dennis, that I owe him an N. Not the N on Pelin, I didn't leave that out. But I did leave out one of the N's in Dennis, and kept on leaving it out every time we produced the table of contents. This was entirely my fault. I think I was thinking of Denis Villeneuve or whatever. It's all the more ironic because I've known Dennis for almost 25 years now, having been his PhD supervisor. And Dennis, I really apologize for leaving you, owing you the N. I'll make it up to you. Before introducing them, let me just say this. The essays in this volume, as we say in the preface, serve as a sharp reminder that the achievement of what is known as democracy today involved profound and protracted social struggles by working class people, men and women, which were always resisted by those whose privileges and property were thereby challenged. And Dennis's opening essay in the volume, entitled "The Struggle Over Actually Existing Democracy," particularly makes this point. And so does Sheila Rowbotham's second essay, which is on the struggle of women, the long struggle of women for democracy. Her essay is titled "Women Linking Lives with Democracy." And the central point made in both of them, explicitly in Dennis's, is that the concept of post-democracy, which has gained so much currency in theoretical and political debate as a label for how neoliberal economic forces are undoing the demos, may be seen as neglecting how far the ideational and institutional traces of those residues of privileged resistance, male resistance, ruling class resistance, to the struggle for democracy, have become embedded in, sedimented in, what we now conceive of as democracy. So that's a central theme, I think, in this volume, and it's one that is central to Dennis's leading essay. And he'll speak to that directly. A second facet of this volume involves trying to come to terms with what is now so blithely characterized on the left as neoliberal democracy. This is a term that's thrown around with great abandon on the left. It is ill-defined. Most people who are not in academe don't know what the F it means, have no conception of what one is talking about. And one of the things that we're proudest about in this volume is that the essays which use this term are extremely careful about defining what it means. Defining the way in which markets and states have come together. A competitive economic individualist calculus has come together with actually existing democracy. Out of the contradictions of the antagonism and tension between liberalism and capitalism that emerged in the 30 years after the Second World War. Out of the contradictions in the Keynesian welfare state. What has evolved is a form of neoliberal democracy in which markets are embedded in state benefits, welfare benefits. This is particularly well defined in Ian Mackay's essay, although it's also there very carefully dealt with in Martin Koning's essay on neoliberal democracy, and in the essay on the fear of populism, which is an essay by Pete Rauman on the recent use of referenda and its contradictions as a way of legitimating neoliberal democracy. I won't attempt to summarize what is in the volume as a whole. There is an attempt to rethink democracy not only in the critical sense of an examination of what is actually existing democracy, what is actually existing neoliberal democracy. There's also an attempt to probe at to what extent the Sanders movement in the United States is likely to bring us somewhere beyond neoliberal democracy. An outstanding essay by many people, by someone who many people here will know, Adam Hilton, who's been at many of these register launches, on the contradictions of trying to democratize the Democratic Party. In the preface itself, there's a long number of pages on what Corbyn represents, on what the Corbyn insurrection, the Labour Party represents in this respect, in terms of its possibilities and limitations. In the volume, there are 3 essays on the media and democracy, which are extremely important, we think, as a collection, in terms of understanding the sense in which the term fake news is not simply rhetoric, but is substantive. The sense in which the BBC, public broadcasting, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation have been commercialized, neoliberalized, and any attempt to recapture public broadcasting would have to not simply recapture it formally, but recapture it substantively in terms of its original public and liberal in the best sense purpose. There's an essay on the naivete on the left regarding digital democracy, which the Corbyn Labour Party itself engages in. Beyond that, there's a number of essays that attempt to probe how images of radical democracy live up to the image. The Mondragon Cooperative in Spain, which so many people look at as a model in trying to imagine a non-statist, cooperative form of socialism. A highly critical essay on what's happened to Mondragon, its own emergence as a competitive neoliberal corporation. On the other hand, a sober but sympathetic essay on Barcelona en Comú, the attempt to develop, at least at the municipal level, forms of democratic communing practices. But it's a sober essay rather than an advocacy PAP one. There's a essay on the practice of democratic communism in Kerala. So very different from the Stalinist practices we've known in communist regimes elsewhere in the past. And there's a very interesting essay on the failure to institute a radical agro-democracy, which was in many senses the basis of the pink tide in Latin America. What was seen as radical about it was often coming from peasant communities, attempting to get at a new form of agricultural democracy, which the pink tide, as the essay shows, by another person who's been here, Leandro Viagra-Camus and Cristobal Kay, a very critical essay on the pink tide from that perspective. And then the volume ends with 3 essays on the Marxist and socialist legacy in this respect, of which Ian is one. Another looks at Marx as a radical Democrat, above all, and interprets his socialism, his communism, his political practice as that of a radical Democrat. Alex Demirovich's essay, which also is one of those that ends the volume, does a contrast between Habermasian radical democracy, the Boufflers radical democracy, and socialist democracy, which I think is very insightful. Ian's essay in particular, in addition to defining neoliberalism so precisely and beautifully, attempts to retrieve, through Gramsci as well as C.B. Macpherson, liberalism for the socialist project. Attempts to realize the best of liberalism, as Macpherson wanted to do, through overcoming liberalism's entrapment within a narrow definition of property ownership rather than a common definition of property. So I'll stop now and let these people take over.